We are live. We're live. Hello, 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 warriors. Welcome to today's transmission, which is a special transmission that I will be doing with my partner and co-instructor of our new course, Soul Resurrection. So he's going to be joining us now soon. So say hello as you join us, and let us know that you're here. So, okay. It's gonna be here in a minute. Yeah, we were a little delayed, technical, trying to figure out Instagram was such a struggle. Hi, Lebu. So good to see you. Hi, Giles. Yay, awesome. I hope that, I did what was supposed to happen. Yes. So we will be talking Soul Resurrection today, what it is, as well as our course, which has the same name. Okay, let me just accept. Who? Why is it saying that you are unable to join? Okay. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Yay, so good to have you here on
Glad
Instagram.
to
We
be here.
always are on Zoom, but we're here today.
Yes.
Yes, awesome.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, hello everyone. Are you able to hear us, both of us? Let us know if everything is clear from your side. Yes. Okay, so today we are talking soul resurrection, and this is the same title for our course that we have that is starting October 20th. Right, this is our 3-month group intensive that we will be co-curating, co-instructing. Right, but today we want to talk obviously both the course as well as the broad theme of soul resurrection, right? So let's jump in with like really sharing a little bit about what soul resurrection is for us. Yes. Yes, Weff. Do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So if you just break down the course's name in itself, Soul Resurrection, it kind of speaks for itself, the resurrection of the soul, how we can go about resurrecting our soul and the different processes involved. For me, I have this very omni view in terms of spirituality, and consciousness and awakening. I always learn to see the similarities in different cultures, different religious backgrounds, and just figure out what are they all saying, right? We can always debate about what religion is correct or more correct, or if shamanism is better than being a Christian. But at the core strength of all of these different religious backgrounds, there's this concept of soul deliverance or soul liberation. So this course is focused on that for anyone that wants to go beyond the typical standard template of this religion means I have to do this, this religion means I have to do this, because I'm conscious I have to do this, I can't eat that, because I'm a Christian I have to do this and talk a certain way. When all those again are different personality traits, and all those have pieces of truth to it, but the whole concept is getting rid of the mechanical process of what we go about in terms of spiritual realization and just finding out what works for people, what helps you have a breakthrough, what helps you realize and self-realize yourself to have a greater awakening and a greater epiphany for yourself.
And what is that?
And Joy, I can go further, but
Yes, go further.
okay, yeah, it was buffering, so I wasn't sure. I was okay. So yeah, that's for me is the structure of the course. It's about going past what somebody says you're supposed to do or is supposed to work, regardless of whether you call it meditation, prayer. When you really look at the processes behind both of them, they're really one and the same. Because what it's actually doing to you, how it's unraveling the soul, how it's working through different spiritual processes is ultimately the same. I have a vast background that starts for me as being growing up in church, as Christian apostolic church, venturing into Shaolin studies, Buddhist studies, yogic studies. And again, me absorbing all this information helped me to get a better understanding of, for instance, if I am a Christian and I grew up in that background, what is the perception of a Buddhist monk who only knows Buddhism? They've never studied Christian beliefs. Their whole family are Buddhist monks. Does that mean that the infinite creator, the absolute all God, does not penetrate into that system? So by having these different perspectives, I worked on some type of way in this, as a result of this course, to give any person access to the ultimate process of soul resurrection, soul liberation, healing yourself, regardless of what background, belief system you have, going past that to say what is really hurting me and what needs to be healed, what needs to be resurrected, what needs to be revitalized, and what needs to be dismissed. What heavy baggage do I have that needs to be removed from my spiritual space, from my mental space, and even going into the depths of psychology, because psychology is still bits and pieces of spirituality. You can't reach a certain level of liberation and deliverance without acknowledging your faults. And from a Christian view, it's always saying Jesus died for our sins so that we can have eternal life. But from a practical standpoint, we all know that you don't get anything without putting forth work, effort, being diligent, being consistent. And that same is true for spiritual resurrection, spiritual liberation. You have to do the work. You have to be consistent with your spiritual studies, with your spiritual practices to begin to see the results. Now, I will say there's also a concept of efficiency. So you don't want to keep doing the same thing if you're not getting results and you're doing it over and over and it's not being effective for you, which is why I say the mechanical approach. Somebody prays every day because their pastor tells them to. Somebody reads the Bible because their pastor tells them to. Somebody reads the Quran because somebody tells them to, versus because they are truly interested in absorbing the information, the fundamental principles of how this can be applied to their own life, how this can help them free themselves from their own traumas, their own shortcomings, to have a spiritual evolution. That's what this class is all about, is your own spiritual evolution, not because I said it, not because Joy said it, because you have your own practical approach by the resources we give you in the class, to where no one can sidestep you and say that this isn't real. A soul experience isn't something that happened to you, because you had your own experience, you had your own revelation, you had your own testimony of what you experienced in the process.
Yeah, definitely. This course is definitely about getting really, really personal with what we like to say, ultimately the only thing that will stand throughout any process that you're doing, which is essentially your soul, right? Like, so there's so many pathways which we can take in our awakening, in our ascension, in our spiritual development, right? But the aspect that is actually doing that is taking this path, right, is the soul. At the very least, ultimately that's what we are seeking, even if maybe we didn't realize that we are seeking to connect with that infinite spark within ourselves, that solar Christ, that impulse that will connect us to the greater truth of who we are, the greater truth of why we're here, the greater truth of the meanings of the specific experiences that we've had in our lives, even specific experiences that our ancestors have had, or the collective group that we find ourselves belonging to have had. Like ultimately it's about the soul, and this is what we want to bring into a deeper awareness. For me, this is like so important because I have explored all different types of pathways, you know, from, well, I wouldn't say all of them. I haven't really went that much deeply in terms of like religion, but the particular spirituality of African spirituality or indigenous spirituality, new age spirituality, ascension spirituality. And in all of that exploration, it's so easy to get lost and caught up about other beings, about our ancestors, about the ascended masters, about the angels, right? About Jesus, you know, and in doing that, we find ourselves in this loop. We just keep recycling year after year. We're not actually seeing changes happening in our actual lives. We are still not really feeling that inner peace that we somewhere deep inside we're already feeling like there is something that we are supposed to be feeling, a frequency we're supposed to be, but we seem to not be accessing that because we are busy looking for it outside ourselves, looking for it in the tools, right, in the processes, in the rituals, in the ceremonies, in the meditations, while those tools were just always supposed to support us with returning back to the soul, right? So one of the things that we wrote about in our LinkedIn page is how the only thing that's real about this holographic reality is the soul. This is actually your words. You said this to me and I was like, oh, I love this so much. But can we share a little bit more about that? Like how the only thing just like worth really cultivating is this aspect, the soul. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was the epiphany I had on my own spiritual journey, was realizing once I pulled away all the different systems that I studied, from yogic perspectives, Shaolin perspectives, conscious new age perspectives of dream yoga, astral traveling, communicating with ancestors. At the core of all of these systems was one thing, and that was the acceptance that you are a living soul being. So if you take that part away, none of all those systems fall. You can't be a Christian seeking deliverance from God if you don't have a soul. That soul essence is the whole key to any system, any religious perspective. It's all based on the energy of the soul and how you cultivate it to a higher degrees. Even when we deal with Kundalini, what people will call the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, all those different concepts result back to the soul energy. And so you can pull away all the different perspectives and religions, concepts, and at the end of the day, what's left is you're just a soul being. So if that's the only thing that's there, that means that's the only thing real about you. And also that means that it's the most important thing for you to cultivate and have assurance about. And again, we are often taught the concept of heaven and hell. We're often taught the Shambhala in terms of a Buddhist perspective of where we go when we die. So that idea and that concept, if you don't know where you're going when you die, and then what's even worse to me is if someone spoon feeds you, this is what's going to happen when you die, versus you actually having your own practical experience, you experiencing things yourself, versus you repeating what someone else has said. And that's by far the worst thing, is just to repeat what someone else has told you without you fully engaging, interacting, exploring it to see if it's true for yourself. So again, not to try to contest someone necessarily to say that that wasn't true for them, but for you to have your own perspective, understand that each of us has our own mental, emotional space. So what works for one person may not work for someone else. And that's my concept, or my point by the soul liberation, is because what we all have collectively is the soul. And how we cultivate it is going to be based on each person, what works better for them, what resonates with their soul more. That's going to be relative. But in terms of the work, that how you access that soul space and that sacred place is all the same. We're also seeking a certain form of liberation, either consciously or unconsciously. We're either aware of it or not aware of it, where we go through different lifetimes of pain and go through different things, and we wonder why we're going through these turmoil situations. And actually, it's aligned with our soul mission when we deal with why the soul has to go through suffering, why it has to go through the human experience, why it has to go through pain. It's truly this divine purpose. Now, again, once we start understanding that if it's a divine purpose, we can be conscious of, I understand I'm going through this. And you start to cut yourself from those loops of repetitious patterns that you do over and over again. And you realize that your soul consciousness is trying to teach you something. So once you become conscious that your soul is trying to teach you something, you begin to listen more. And seemingly enough, most people will find out that their life seems a little bit easier. It seems to be a little bit more aligned to what they actually are. The person that they feel like they are inside starts to match their outward appearance on how they do, how they move, what they do as a career, their charisma, their energy that they bring into the room. All of that is based on them tapping into that solar power energy that they have.
Yeah. So yes, definitely, Giles, soul resurrection is not a belief system. And in fact, that's the whole motivation for us, like inspiration to why we want to bring this work to so many of us, because so many of us, we get stuck in the belief system. And it is belief systems, you know, these identities that we hold on to that actually often, you know, hold the soul back, like creates all of these repetitive cycles. Ultimately, if we understand that our journey through life is, yes, for exploration, for having these experiences, for evolving the potential, what's possible, we can also understand that, like, our attachments, right, to these experiences is what bounds us to the earth, right, and what binds us to the suffering itself. And all journeys, all healing, all liberation, all salvation processes that are there to help you transcend all of these identities, all of these stories, particularly the human ones that you have attached yourself into, so that you can actually expand, return back to the greater truth of who you are. And that greater truth is beyond any religion, any spiritual system, any identity that you have here as a human being. Right? Like the idea of the soul is what we call like the solar Christ, that Christ impulse, that infinite essence, pure essence that is made in the image of God, which means it is just like God. It is literally, we're just the fractals of God, right? But so many of us, we don't experience this because we keep holding on to these belief systems that divide things for us, where there is God and there's you, there's this and you. Like, it's always so separative. And that's why we get so lost and so stuck, and we keep finding ourselves from one lifetime into another, just repeating and not getting really what the purpose of each life experience is, each incarnation is, right? So for us, when we were creating soul resurrection, we wanted to transcend all these belief systems. Me and Weff, we come from different belief systems and cultures and influences, and also we have similar influences at the same time. But what we found that connects us is the soul. It's the infinite aspect of ourselves that allows us to connect on a pure level, or on a harmonious level, right? And if we look at the issues that we're finding in the world, are we not all fighting for our own belief systems, right? Like, which God is the right God, which culture is the right culture, which race is the right one? Like, all the things eventually lead us to belief systems. And for us, we must transcend that. Yeah. Right. So the solar Christ, love. What is the solar Christ? Because one of the things that we're doing with soul resurrection is cultivating and awakening the solar Christ. And I think the interesting thing about this title, soul resurrection, is it has this connotation of religion, and we spoke about that, like the resurrection of the Christ, awakening the solar Christ. It can be quite confusing when we have like an idea of what it means. But for us, what does this mean, awakening the solar Christ?
Right. Yeah. So the solar Christ for me is, if you just study the story of Jesus in the Bible, if you study the story of Buddha, like the concept of forgiveness and compassion. Like you said, we have all these different religions that divide us seemingly on what is correct or wrong. But if in your own personal life, if you start making a habit of, instead of having anger towards people that you normally don't like, you normally have a very dismissive attitude towards certain religions or perspectives, if you start putting yourself in their shoes and starting to understand their perspective, it leads to a greater realization of forgiveness and understanding the flaws of humanity, of how it's never going to be perfect as long as you look from that angle. There's always going to be a different perspective. There's always going to be a different viewpoint. But when you begin to look at things as a soul being, or the Christ being, or the solar Christ being, as you put it, you have this higher level of forgiveness in your heart, to where you begin to understand what the saying is, we're all God's children. So you have this infinite amount of forgiveness and compassion because you understand how flawed the system naturally is. And by doing that, you expand your heart to a greater capacity and your soul to a greater capacity, to where you have more love, more compassion, more abundance, to where there's no longer this intrusiveness. When you see something new or something different that you don't understand, you become curious to understand that person's perspective. And that adds in your own gnosis and knowledge in your own life to have a wider, greater understanding. So for me, the soul of Christ is really tapping into the true essence of what we are, versus the ego or the human essence that tries to say, I'm this type of person, I wear these type of clothes, I follow this religion, I do this, I don't do that, and I don't associate myself with anybody who does do that. Instead of saying, I understand why someone can do this in this particular mode of thought. For instance, a Christian understanding a Baptist understanding of a Buddhist monk, understanding that the underlying tone is all about a certain level of sacredness, of divinity that you hold somewhere. And that is what we're talking about. Where do you hold that? In your soul essence. And that's the whole concept and key with that, is holding that sacred place with the soul of Christ energy, understanding we're all divine beings, understanding that we all have an intention and a meaning and purpose for being down here and going through what we're going through.
Yeah, definitely. So, Giles, you are asking, why is it that many are spellbound to understand what we're talking about? Is it really spells, or are they under possession with these belief systems? Well, I mean, one, it's about understanding what the ultimate purpose of the earth experience is, right? And they are definitely hidden aspects of the human experience that most people are not able to access, mostly because of memory. We don't remember, right? And that's the whole purpose also of our work, is to help us remember, to retrieve our soul memories so that we can actually understand from a vaster universal perspective what is really happening, right? So in a way, yes, we are within like what we call a force field, right? This force field, it has like different names. Some of the names for that is like the rim pass knot. So there's like a frequency around our earth. And when you are within the earth, there is a certain forgetfulness that you enter, right? And this is why even the idea of your own soul could be like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I'm a divine infinite being. Or like we don't experience it in a way that is like a daily life experience. Most people, it's just something that maybe you feel once in a while when you are in spiritually activating spaces, like when you are at church, when you're praying, when you're meditating, when you're partnering, right? But this is what you are, who you be all the time. You're supposed to feel this. But the force field, the frequency here on the earth has dampened our memory, and it's part of the soul's journey to awaken, right? It's almost like it is the game of life. The game of life is to walk back to your soul, to return back to the greater truth of who you are, right? Obviously, it's such a big conversation, but understanding that in some level there is aspects of ourselves that are in forgetfulness, and that part of resurrecting, that's what you are resurrecting. You are resurrecting the memory of who you are. And that memory for us, we believe it's already within you. It's within the soul world, and it is about you connecting back with that soul essence, that solar Christ. And once you do, a lot of the things will become unveiled for you. You begin to truly see the greater reality that we are in, right? And you begin to understand specific experiences that you are having. I think that Sydney, you are asking that once you identify, then what? Like, so once you obviously understand what's going on, you are able to take steps that are aligned with a greater healing, a greater experience, a greater harmony of your soul energy, so you become more and more of yourself, right? So a lot of our suffering comes because we are not being ourselves, right? Maybe that's because we don't remember who we are. And so we've been kind of like in that loop of forgetfulness, and we've taken actions towards ourselves and towards each other that are kind of creating even more suffering. And then it's just like a loop. You're just like in that, what we call a karmic loop, repeating same lessons, same teachings, and we don't get it. We don't get it because we don't remember. We are not connected to the solar Christ, that impulse within, that greater truth within you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. I would agree. So the idea is, as I like to say, is to hijack or jump above that loop of your soul continuously trying to teach you this infinite lesson of forgiveness, of awareness and consciousness. When we're tapping into the soul memory of, you begin to remember things otherwise that you seemingly wouldn't remember in terms of previous lifetimes, previous traumas, and it's always synced. Like, whatever we have going on in our day-to-day life is an absolute reflection of our soul memory and our soul trauma, the things that our soul has been through. So it's always a reflection. So by seemingly just observing your life that you do, the things you do day to day, the things that happen to you, you begin to understand like what's happening with your soul. So again, it's not this huge concept that's not reachable or tangible. You can easily study your life, see the habits that you have, the emotions that you have, the traumas that you hold, the things that you avoid. You start to ask yourself, why am I avoiding this? Why am I avoiding dealing with this? Why am I avoiding these things and gravitating towards these particular things? That's the road to your soul, because it always leads back to you. When you go past the human shell, past the ego of what you want to be, your personality of who you think you are, what you aren't, and you start really asking yourself those hard questions of, why do I have a hard time accepting this? Why do I avoid this? That is the road back to your soul resurrection, because for the first time, if you're doing that, it can be a bit much. And then also, for the first time, you begin to have this different perspective of really realizing how vulnerable you are. And in realizing that, you realize how everyone else is truly vulnerable if they're really honest with themselves. And that's the whole concept of the soul, is you can't enter that soul realm with an egotistical, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this prestige, I'm this. It won't allow you to enter that way. You have to enter with the heart and mind of a child, or the soul of Christ. You have to have pure intentions, pure intent. And that's what I always have. Like I said, regardless of what spiritual belief you come from, I do not want to like scare anyone away if they are a Christian or if they are a shaman. But what I'm saying is, outside of all of that, if we get down to the core of what's happening in those belief systems, if somebody's really about doing spiritual work, it's about the soul. And entering that soul realm, you can't say, I'm the shaman of this, and shamanism is better than Christian viewpoints, or vice versa. There's a certain level of integrity of, we're all coming from this one place that's sacred and pure. And if you have that mindset, that opens up so many doors for you spiritually, and even in your, again, in your practical life, your physical world starts to change based on that. So
Yeah. One of the things that I started to notice in my work, as someone who is working with ancestral energy and ancestral healing, is that most of us, we're actually not ready to deal with the liberation of other souls, because your ancestors are other souls. So if you haven't yet dealt with your own karmic energy, your own pain and your own suffering, trying to liberate, because that's what ancestral healing is, right? That's at the core of African spirituality when we say we're, liberating our ancestors or cleansing our ancestors of the karma that they have accumulated. I don't even think we understand it that way most of the time, right? But in doing this work, supporting other people, whenever I tried to actually begin the ancestral work, there was always this block where I realized we can't go there yet, because the energy that the individual is holding is too dense. It's still holding so much pain, because ultimately all healing, all true liberation requires that pure intention that you're talking about, love, that sacred purity, love. You have to be able to uphold that frequency. And if we have not yet been able to do that for ourselves, it's going to be very difficult to do that for that ancestor who did this and that and all of that, right? So we can get lost in a lot of these other systems if those systems don't return us back to ourselves, right? Ultimately, interestingly, of course, our true luminous ancestors, they want you to liberate yourself first. And once you have built enough life force, quanta, soul energy, solar Christ energy, then you can help others. And this is part of why there's so much pain and wounding within spiritual spaces, because so many of us jumped into something that we are not yet ready, we have not yet cultivated enough energy to actually start going to the collective, right? So we have to first return back to the self first, work with the self, cultivate the self. Honestly, there's no savior. Like, you are your own savior, right? And in fact, in resurrecting your own solar Christ energy, your soul energy, it ripples out even faster than any other process you can do, right? Like, in upholding that, like I have experience being around people who, they've worked on that soul energy, and just the frequency is so healing, right? And it becomes that ripple effect. So what if we knew that this is so simple, right? Like, we get so caught up with so many of the processes that we forget, like, it's really simple. We are already given the tools. The tool is within yourself. The kingdom is within you. You work within your own kingdom. You build your own kingdom. And then while that kingdom is resurrected, other people are inspired to build their own kingdoms, right? Including your ancestors, including the living generations, those people who are of your blood as well, right? So for me, part of why in everything that I do, I was, like, from the very beginning, always going back to the soul before we can even start doing liberating our ancestors, because it's a real process. When we say we're liberating our ancestors, when we say we're cleansing our ancestors, we're really cleansing the souls of our ancestors, and that's a real process. So you have to actually be ready for that.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah, for me, my own spiritual journey of communicating with ancestors, and to be honest, for me, it's a little different, but now that I'm working with Joy more, I get the concept of African culture has a different perspective of ancestors versus the American culture. But interesting enough, I definitely was communicating with my ancestors once I really took the vitality and health of my soul seriously. Seemingly interacted with a lot of transcended relatives and really didn't think much of it. But I can contest, like, once you begin the journey of soul liberation, the effect is you will end up helping your ancestors, your ancient uncles, grandfathers. They all come into play. But that's because, think of it like a room of darkness, right? So your soul resurrection is the equivalent to a very bright light. So the brighter your light is in terms of a soul, the easier it is for different ancestors, different transition beings to see you. If your light is dim and you want to go in there and try to help the ancestors or look to them for guidance, they won't even acknowledge you because your soul essence isn't bright enough to be acknowledged as a soul being. So I absolutely agree. The whole beginning process is making yourself purified and cleansed enough to where you are seen as a soul being. And that's the whole point, is to do the work for yourself. And by doing that, you actually help a lot of other people along their way without you even really trying. And that's unfortunate that most people try to focus on helping and healing everyone else when they haven't done the work themselves. So yeah, I definitely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And when we do that, especially for those who end up taking the role of healers and guides and facilitators of the healing process, we definitely can bring our pain into the work, and that can really delay the actual liberation of those who we are actually trying to help, right? So it's like this cycle. But like, I think that what we don't understand is that, like, there is a framework, a spiritual science to all of this, to awakening, to healing, to liberation. There is a science to it, a process, a sacred law, and we can't actually bypass that sacred law. And we know that we may not be in alignment with sacred law if we keep finding ourselves stuck in the same situation, no matter how many meditations we do, prayers, ceremonies, rituals. Is because we skipped something, right? And often most of the things we skipped it was always that soul energy. We don't have enough quanta to go retrieve particular processes. And what does like not having enough life force really mean, and where does that come from? Whenever we go through a specific painful experience, a traumatic event, that experience affects the soul more than anything, really. Like, of course, the human can also be affected, but the soul is often jarred because this is almost like not its nature. So in experiencing that, the soul can actually move further away from ourselves, from our physical body. And so each time we go through specific experiences, our soul energy keeps decreasing, right? And when it decreases, then we don't have enough life force. And our life force comes from our soul energy, our solar Christ. And when we don't have enough life force, this is how disease happens. This is how scarcity, lack happens. This is how any form of suffering that we can go through, whether that's within our relationships or our money or our bodies or our purpose, is because we are not working with a full capacity of our soul energy, right? And so when we don't have that full capacity of our soul energy, it's like literally you're working with like 10-30% of your true potential, which is kind of like what all humanity is doing. We're not working with our full potential. So that's why things are so hard. But it doesn't mean that it's supposed to stay this way. We have the ability to cultivate that energy, to build our soul energy. And we do that by aligning ourselves with the impulse of the solar Christ that is within you, but also obviously there is a greater field of the solar Christ, right? What some people call the Christ consciousness or the Christ impulse, right? So when we align ourselves with this, we have more life force to do certain things and to create and to manifest, right? To materialize deeper connections, to materialize healing, what we may perceive as miraculous healing, but actually there's like a science to it. What you did there was like you built enough solar Christ energy that solar Christ energy dissolved that pain body within you. So understanding like why we keep getting stuck because each time we go through pain, that pain doesn't disappear. It's added to our bigger soul body, right? And it has an impact to the soul. And so if we don't cleanse it and purify it and heal it, it's going to weigh us down in this lifetime. And we will always just find ourselves just in those loops where things are hard. So ultimately, that's the whole idea of why, for us, working with the soul is vital. Cultivating your life force is vital. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the concept of, I guess we could say the soul energy is equivalent to having enough gas in your tank, right? You know you have a long distance to travel, but you don't have enough soul quantum built up in yourself. But you're trying to do all these extra things and say that you're this high level spiritualist and you want to heal your ancestors and heal other people, but you haven't done enough internal work. That's the whole key to this. And also understanding, you were talking about, I think you said the solar Christ. There was something I wanted to say. I'm trying to make sure I remember it. But for me, the solar Christ, like I said, there's so many different analogies in different religions, from Buddhism, Christian viewpoint, Muslim viewpoint of Allah. But again, my key is to study the story. Study the story of that character, of what they did in the Bible, how they lived their life, how they had forgiveness, how they had compassion, how they have this undying desire just to be of service, right? To be a resource for whoever was willing. That is the true essence of the solar Christ energy. And that's what we want to have. And that's what this course is all about, of having pure intentions, regardless of where you come from, what walk of life you come from, and how to access that, how to increase the amount of energy you have. So most of us don't even realize how much energy, our soul energy, we use up in a day, in terms of how rampant our emotions are, how frantic we are, how stressed we are, how much anxiety we have, how much fear we have. It's all taking away from our soul power. So being more conscious of that, of how much energy you exert towards different things that really don't serve you in terms of energetics, and how to start negating that and changing that system to where you are sending more energy back to your soul deliverance part of yourself, versus giving it away and then wondering why you don't have enough energy to carry on, or don't feel confident enough to start that new business, or don't feel confident enough to start a new relationship, or wonder why you keep running into the same patterns of faults with your relationships and the people that you attract. That's all based on polarity and, like you said, a science system that's built. So once you understand how that science system is built, you have the resources to begin to change and modify it.
Yeah, definitely. So the greater work is definitely with your soul. Like, if you can focus on this, everything else obviously becomes so much easier, right? And so for us, the current framework that we're using for soul resurrection is one, the awakening of your solar Christ, because we can actually pretty much do anything until we have built that life force. And building our solar Christ is one mostly connected to remembering and connecting back with your soul energy, right? And understanding and very practically experiencing this. And this is the thing about this course, it's going to be very practical, right? Like the processes that we're going to be doing are, very experiential in nature. You will experience this. So once we have awakened that solar Christ, your soul energy, then we can begin to do the healing of the karmic imprints. So what are these karmic imprints? It's essentially anything that you find in your life that creates one state of very intense emotions that trigger you, for lack of a better word, right? Things that hold so much emotional charge, that is often connected to your karmic energy. And then two, things that keep repeating. You keep finding yourself in the same relationships. You keep finding yourself with the same situation with your money. You keep finding yourself struggling to like step into your mission. Like something seems to be holding you back and you can't seem to figure it out. And you've done all the Googling and the researching and listening to the people, but like nothing is actually really helping you move through that pattern, right? It keeps repeating. Right? Of course, we understand, and for me as a genetic alchemist, I understand, of course, our karmic imprints are connected to our ancestry, of course, right? But like something happens when you kind of like zoom in to just me and me alone, and let me just figure this out. We can find, yes, okay, the money situation is repeating because there is an ancestral pattern, but it's important to know that we are in the bloodlines we are in, because those bloodlines hold the same pains and same gifts that our soul already held as well. And so that's why we are part of that bloodline to bring more energy that can deal with that pain, that wound, and also to bring the gifts that we already had, and that amplified now by the blood, the DNA, what you inherited, so that you can even do that work of healing and clearing karmic imprints. When you clear them within yourself, you are really clearing them within the blood. So that's why there's going to be a ripple effect as well. And that ripple effect will affect your ancestors, but also more than anything, the future generation. And this is how, like, the idea of like the new earth, heaven on earth, this is how it's created. It's created internally. It's not going to happen through external processes that we're doing, or like us, changing the laws. I mean, of course that will help, but if we understood that it has to start first within, and then the without will start to reflect back, then we can see why this work is important, right? So the healing of the karmic imprints is like a huge part of that. And then we do the liberation of the soul. So what is this part now? How do we now arrive to this last part?
The liberation of the soul, that's the part you're talking about. That is not for the faint of heart, but for those who are very serious about liberating their soul, right? Everything you just mentioned is the process of liberating the soul, going within. Most people, honestly, are scared to go within because they are scared of what they're going to find. All the dark shadows, all the hidden places that they don't want to address or discover were there. Instead, they ignore and carry on like everything is fine when it's not. So by going within is seemingly this big, huge pile of dirty laundry that most people have not addressed for years and years, pent up inner child trauma, pent up aggression, pent up issues with family members, mother, father, the list goes on, relationships. And to get to that place of soul liberation, we have to address all of those and all those different things. Why am I angry at this person? Why do I feel like I was never entitled to life to have an equal opportunity like everyone else? What happened in my life that caused this particular situation? All those are the constraints and binds and ties that tie down the soul and suck up the energy from us realizing that true level of spirituality, that true level of holiness, that true level of sacredness that we all have deep within ourselves once we shed ourselves of the flesh and the human perception. So that is the key to soul liberation. And again, like I said, it's like the sword that's stuck in the stone. There's a certain level of strength, integrity that has to be held within that person to pull it out of the stone. It's not necessarily physical strength or stamina. There's also the emotional, psychological level that goes with that. So for me, the soul liberation is stepping up to the plate and saying, I know I have something in me that needs to be purged, purified, cleansed, and not in the sense of a once and done process, accepting that this is a continuous process of evolution, of continually realizing there's stuff that's going to surface and come up along the spiritual journey that you thought you were okay with, and then you find out that you're very traumatized by a particular situation. You have all these different epiphanies that come up and you realize, I thought I was okay, but I'm not. But now that I know that I'm not, I need to take the time to heal and figure out what I need to do to fix this, because my soul salvation is on the line. So for me, that's the concept of soul liberation, is rolling up your sleeves and not being scared to get dirty when it gets messy, when you have emotional turmoils, how to go in there and deal with them and still be able to carry on in your normal life and balance everything out.
Yeah. Right. So I just want to invite you, if you have any question, let us know. You can put your questions here so that we can just like cover that or clarify that if you have any, as we're coming close to the end of like our share on soul resurrection. Right. So this course is starting in October 20th, so a month from now. As you can see, this is just like when you feel like you're at that point in your life where you really just want to, streamline and come back to one energy that you can work with, right? And you want to go to the foundation, you want to align with the law, right? And begin to do work that will actually tangibly create actual changes, actual impact in your life in ways that you can see this, right? Then this course is definitely for you, because I think for me personally, I am really, really frustrated and honestly pissed off by the karmic loops, constantly repeating the same thing year after year, like it doesn't change. You do the rituals and then you feel good for 3 weeks and then it's gone, right? So this is part of what we are hoping to, for us, it's about giving you the tools, right? It's about giving you the tools that you will have those tools with you to navigate and to continue to resurrect your soul. There is no way that you can fully do all that we just spoke about in 3 months, but the skills, the technologies, the tools that you will receive from this 3 months, they are enough to release so much of like the karma that you've been holding. That's enough to accelerate your healing, to accelerate your alchemy, to accelerate that liberation of the soul in ways that if you do the work, right, you will definitely start to see those changes within yourself. And for us, we're just talking about like, we've seen this with our own work. We did our own soul resurrection and soul liberation. We're still continuing, of course, to do this. But what we have been able to see in terms of the shifts happening on our individual lives, once we started to do this, it's so powerful and so profound that we feel like, oh, people must know this, like this is why there is such a loop, particularly in our communities that we're seeing, and we are inspired to bring this to you. Right. Yeah. Okay. So do you wanna answer, Sydney, love? Do you see that question?
Okay, so what is the best way to heal these shadows and past traumas as we do the letters in the work, yet we repeat? Okay, the easiest way is not necessarily the easiest way. It's being realistic with yourself, right? If something keeps coming up over and over again, ask yourself, why does it keep coming up over and over again? Clearly, what I thought was working is not working. There might be a deeper core problem that you may have looked over. So again, I always bring practicality. If you're doing something and everybody says it's supposed to work, but when you look at it in terms of your own life, if it's not working, start to question that. Say, why is it not working, and what is happening that I keep going through this process over and over again? If the fact that it's repeating means it's something that Joe was saying, it's a karmic loop that you haven't quite figured out the pieces of it that is continuing to make it loop. So you want to dive a little bit deeper, begin to pull away a little bit more of your assumptions and stop assuming anything and start from the very beginning, as if you were possibly a psychologist or a pastor talking to yourself, asking questions. What was your childhood like? What caused this event to happen in the first place? So essentially, you want to find the root cause of this. Before you accepted it as adult, as an issue, start looking at where it started. Maybe as a child, what was the first instance or situation you had that impacted you to now that you're an adult, you're realizing you're having a similar issue over and over again. So we want to like go a little bit deeper, as they say, dig deeper, go further to really get to the cause of it. And again, as I said, it's not a one and a done process. There's always multiple pieces. So you might have uncovered one piece of the puzzle, but you still have to uncover 3 or 4 more before you start to see a difference in your life in terms of the repetitious patterns.
I think one of the things that is vital to kind of like really introspect on and maybe even realize is how it is not easy. Soul resurrection, soul liberation is not easy. Like even ancestral work is not easy. This spiritual path is not easy. The reason why that's the case is because of our history, the history of the soul, the history of our ancestral experiences, the history of this world that we have went through. I think like one of the things that limit so many of us is that we're looking for those easier, like quick changes and we're expecting them to happen instantly. But that's, if like we are being honest, as Weff was saying, if we're just genuinely being honest and you look at the 30, 40 years of your life experiences, then you can realize, of course, then if I've spent this long with this pain, I can't just expect it to be done after one instance, you know? Just like very logically, very practically with it. Like if we can have that kind of like realization and acceptance, it actually makes the work easier. Of course, this doesn't mean that this process takes a really long time for you to start seeing the results. It's actually the moment you accept like the pain, you accept like the experiences that you've had, and you have a certain level of curiosity. You're curious to observe, to learn about yourself, about your experiences. Once you do this, this is even like the first step of cultivating that solar Christ energy. And it is that solar Christ energy that has the power to actually transmute something that you've been stuck on for 40 years in such a short time. But it's like you have to accept first, and then it will begin to happen, right? So, and having that like very honest, curious mind is very, very vital in this process, right? So I hope that is also really helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a question, another question from Jill's. How human souls or spirits become trapped on the earth, and why they need energy from people? How do human souls or spirits become trapped on the earth, and why do they need energy from people? Do you want to share this one?
Sure, I can expand. To a certain extent, it's most of the stuff we talked about. And it's also perspective. You can say trapped, or you can say they came down here because their soul needed to learn something. So maybe you want to begin to explore the concept of the word trapped, because the truth is you can't be trapped. It's more than likely a lesson that you have to learn. So once you change your perspective of this is an experience that my soul has designated I need to go through, start asking, why am I going through these things? Why am I having these experiences? And in doing that, you no longer have the trap mindset, because you'll find your door to liberation, right? So in terms of the energetics for people, if we understand that we're all soul beings having a human experience, we have to look outside of the human perspective from a soul perspective, saying that there may be a greater purpose as a collective soul energy, right? As humans, we say, oh, this suffering hurts, this pain is terrible. Why did this happen to me? Why did I have to go through heartbreak? But that is always from the perspective of someone who didn't go back in to heal that heartbreak, right? They didn't heal that pain that they dealt with. When you begin to heal the pain on a consistent basis, there's a certain level of serenity, of peacefulness, because you start to realize how small it is in the greater scheme of things, of holding aggression, holding anger, and seeing how belittling and how wasteful that is to the greater extent of what we really are as soul beings. So that sense of compassion, the soul of Christ energy, gives you a different perspective on life and how you look at things, and understand that all these different circumstances that arise are for a greater good. And there's definitely ways you can navigate through it to level up to where you don't have to go through as much, because you're becoming conscious and you're tuning into your soul and you're listening to it, to where you don't keep making the same mistake when the soul is trying to direct you one direction, but your human part wants to go the other direction. So by aligning yourself to that, you start to realize, okay, maybe this isn't necessarily a trap. Maybe this is something I need to go through. And then you say, well, why do I need to go through it if you don't know? But then after you start going through it, you begin to understand what happened when you went through that. What was the end result by you going through a certain process that you thought was terrible? For instance, learning to ride a bike as a child. If we're a child, it's typically very intimidating, scary. It's not fun. But as you learn to ride the bike, you learn to balance yourself. Next thing you know, it's one of the biggest things that most kids do. They ride their bikes with their friends. It's something that they thought was terrible, but the aftermath of what they went through to get to that process is something wonderful. So again, I just recommend changing the perspective and understanding to see it as this is an experience and I have to go through things for a particular reason.
Yeah, definitely. One of the also cool thing about soul resurrection is that you're always gonna receive two perspectives, like Weff and mine, which is always, I think, so powerful in our work for those who work with us. I think Court is here. Hi, Court. um, so just also on the same question on how soul become trapped on the earth and why they need energy, it's ultimately about the pain, about that separation energy, right? Last week I spoke about how forgiveness is when we release the shame, the fear, the guilt, and a lot of these emotions of fear, shame, and guilt. Which one? I think I'm forgetting the fourth one. They're actually so powerful and so heavy for the soul that they often can create an entire energy field, right? An entire energy field, which often we call that like energy field, the lower astral. Other religions, they call that like a purgatory energy or like the hell realm or the eighth sphere. So there are just many different names for the collective unprocessed pain of humanity, that each time we don't deal with it, it's pulled into that frequency. And then that energy, because emotions of guilt and shame and pain are so heavily charged, those energies can take on a Satan frequency. They can start to become their own fields, and they will start to basically need to be sustained. And they are sustained by what? These lower emotions of more shame, more guilt, more pain, right? Which is then how we end up getting trapped here, right? The more we do not deal with these emotions, the more we don't clear our shame, our guilt, our pain, our fears, the more we will end up like, essentially, you are the one who's creating that experience of feeling trapped, if you want to look at it from that other perspective, right? So in African spirituality, there's definitely rituals that are done which are for the liberation of souls that we say are trapped. And really, I know that's probably where you're asking it from, that perspective. Really, it's really that pain, it's that suffering. And the release of that is really the release of the pain, which is why ultimately the greatest work we can ever do in this lifetime is to actually heal, is to release these emotions, is for us to arrive to forgiveness, to arrive to compassion, to kindness, to freedom, right? That is how we become purer, clearer beings. And even in the processes of, like, in my language, we're saying we're clearing sififi, we're clearing your shadow. And the shadow can also be thought of as like an egregore or a taupa, like a real energy that we may feel like it's attached to a person. A lot of the time, that attachment is happening because even within your own being, there is the same frequency of the pain, right? So all shadow is just pain, unprocessed pain, right? And it's easy to get lost in the greater gory details when we need to come back to what is the true essence of it. The true essence of it is this, is the pain, which is why we will be focusing on that, on healing our pain, releasing our pain, arriving to the state of forgiveness, of unconditional love, of understanding, of kindness and compassion to ourselves and to other people that we're on this journey with. Yay. Awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
For me, the pain is the biggest shadow that everyone dwells. We want to point the finger outside of ourselves when it's something that we don't like and make it this entity that we don't have control over. But 9 times out of 10, it's our own suppressed traumas, or suppressed issues, suppressed just emotions that most people don't want to deal with. and you think about everyday life, the average person has so many things to deal with. Very few of us focus and designate time to addressing the trauma that comes through in our life, designating the emotional turmoil we go through in a day. Just think about that. Like in a day, how much anxiety, how much fear, how many emotions do you go through, and how does that affect you? We seemingly accept, like, in the morning you got to get up and take a shower. That's the general consensus of acceptance. But we don't typically accept that we emotionally have to cleanse ourselves on a day-to-day basis to purify and get things out. So again, when you seemingly begin this process, it's overwhelming because there's all these shadows, all these compressed emotions that we haven't dealt with.
Yeah. So this is a foundational course. We're going to be doing this for, it's really 12 modules, which will be covered really in 4 months, because we're going to have a break in between every month. So it's actually 4 months, from October to, I think, January or February, because we're going to have a bit of a break in December for the holidays, right? So if this is really speaking to you and you're really wanting to dive deep very specifically on this, the work of your soul, then you can check out in my link tree or Weff's link tree, the course link, and you can just read about it and apply for the course, right? We will also have a free 30 minutes discovery session with everyone who's applying, just so that we can just clarify everything, so that you understand the process and how everything will be unfolding, right? So one question that we had received was, what is the difference between this course and the mystery school, right? I know that there are some people who are like interested in the mystery school, and maybe you are even saving up for the mystery school, which will be coming again next year. The mystery school is like a 1-year program it is an ascension program. It's still really, I think this is the body of our work. It's ascension. It's the liberation of your soul, of your spirit, of your being. It's the ascending beyond this earth realm, so that you can start to go have higher experiences. Well, not higher, other experiences in other worlds, if that's what you desire. If you're looking for that kind of experience as a soul being, then that's what we are providing in terms of the resources, the tools, the technologies that we are sharing. So the mystery school is a longer process where we look into many different aspects of your being, which includes mostly your childhood experiences, your soul experiences. So we will have modules on the soul, but not as intensively as we're going to be doing with soul resurrection. We will also be dealing with ancestral healing and genetic healing in the mystery school as well. And I think at the core of it, the essence of the mystery school, what makes it different is that it's more oriented on that DNA regeneration, genetic work, ancestral work, right? While this one is primarily on the soul. It does not mean we will not talk about ancestors. It's just actually really impossible to ever do any spiritual work without mentioning the genetics and the DNA. But our core mission with this one is your soul and your soul energy, and working and cultivating that. I feel like doing this course prepares you for even deeper work that we have available in some of my product suites as well, and what we'll also create as well in the future, right? So like for us, this is a foundation, and after doing this for so long, I just constantly kind of like arriving to the realization, ooh, we're not ready for this ancestral work, let's go back. So yeah, I know that we want to help our ancestors, but let's first help ourselves. So this is what this course is going to be about. Right.
Yes. Yeah, I'll add, it's all about self-healing. The true practical approach of healing versus going to a healing session and saying, oh, I'm healed, it's all done, dusting your fingers off like you don't have anything else to do. So this is really like the precursor to, regardless of what lifestyle, religious background you have, it's so you have a practical experience of liberating your soul, know what it feels like, what your life will look like, and having all these resources available to you. I'll also add, like, the courses are more based on interaction. The mystery school is definitely based on interaction, but I think like it's half and half. Like we're only going to be talking half the class. The rest of the class will be interaction with other students, as well as exercises, meditations. So even if you in your busy schedule, you don't have time to do the coursework outside of class, we'll be doing a lot of this stuff in class and during class.
Yes. So yeah, we're getting very, very practical with this one and very experiential because yeah, it's a cultivation. We want to cultivate, we want to build such that by the end of the course, you really build so much of the quanta to the level that you are able to, of course. Right. So you can check that out. It's definitely, yes, for those who are, yeah, who are just like, I'm done. I'm just done with the patterns. I just can't go again another year, 2023, just like with the same issues whatsoever. Right. Yeah. So because we